So, following up on my comments on fang guan. Fang guan is a spiritual practice. It's a type of exercise. You know, yoga is a spiritual exercise as well. It comes from the idea that the body has certain energies. Kind of like that, China has people believing in physiological energies and so on and so forth. After the communists came to power, they started rewriting history. And they began, a Mao cultural rewriting of how things should be done. Mao's wife was some actress, and yeah, she basically promoted stagnating Chinese dancing, Chinese theater, so on. And the culture was forced into a certain way of thinking. When you look at very old black and white Chinese movies, you tend to get this sidetracking. Oh, and the great revolution, yada 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 yada, is Actually, there was an actual Phantom of the Opera movie adaptation by the Chinese, where a guy just out of nowhere goes and worships to the left-wing revolution. It's kind of weird. You get a sense that people were a little bit overindulgent into this idea when you watch those movies. Well, now, flash forward to now, you have someone copying Tom Cruise and copying Top Gun, and at some point a Chinese general gives... It's just... I would go on for hours about the weirdness of Chinese media and how they're really, really, really sad in comparison to North Korean media, but I'm getting sidetracked. So in the early 90s, fang guan became this big Chinese trend, and after the Tankman event, the whole Tiananmen Square massacre thing, people were like, hey, how do I get power? How do I get power? And this one guy nicknamed Hama, or Haha, the Frog. Now you understand where that NCIS term comes from. That guy wasn't French. That guy was probably based on the Chinese person. He pointed out that the biggest protest since the Tiananmen Square massacre by students was all these kids protesting something related to fang guan, because it was banned at some point. And during this protest, one Chinese teenager, or maybe he was a teenager, maybe he was in his early 20s, I will have to double check. This person sitting on a couch, looked at a Chinese general, and was like, la, 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 you're black, you're mean. He was like the stereotypical 1980s teenager to a Chinese general. He insulted his pride, basically. And all these Chinese leaders were like, hey, let's blame those guys for some stuff. So, from the early 90s to the late 90s, the following thing happened. They invented this whole cult mentality idea about fang guan. It's a cult, it's a violent cult, and at some point they broadcast this video globally where some people who are supposedly fang guan practitioners are setting themselves on fire. If you ever heard of the great Chinese internet crash a couple of years ago, 2/3 of the Chinese internet were rerouted as a form of a denial service attack against the website that promoted this thing. So there's a guy who's in charge of the Great Chinese Firewall, protecting the Chinese internet, and they overdid their denial service attack. A denial service attack is you use a program to redirect hundreds, if not thousands of people towards an internet server, and it crashes the server. That's a weapon being used to destroy a website like this. So this giant event had a documentary listing out all the tricks that the Chinese government used to falsify that video of people supposedly fang guan practitioners killing themselves, setting themselves on fire. So you had a tiny little girl who could speak even though her throat was burnt out. You had an older woman who supposedly drank half a bottle of this poisonous substance and then spit it out, even though the effects of that would be like having a very, very big, very nasty rash on your throat. And days after the event, she was like reciting the whole thing out of nowhere. You had 2 cars filled with Chinese, military people, Chinese police, and they had, for some reason, 25 fire extinguishers with them, even though this was a surprise event. And finally, one of the guys actually killed a person on camera from behind the smoke. Also, demovied makeup effects. So,